so much history and science behind what this might be.
It's kind of moving around a little.
And parts from me were found and thrown in with my son.
Calling boo hags the most dreaded creature in South Carolina folklore.
Is it supposed to be getting closer? I don't know.
These spirits are drawn to this beautiful blue, and they get trapped inside, and when the sun comes up, the bad spirit, the haint, will be destroyed.
And they appear to be moving extremely slowly.
Again, this has been reported for generations.
Am I really seeing this? What is this?
I'm the co-host of Arcane Carolinas, Charlie Mushaw.
And I'm the other co-host, Michael G. Williams.
We're here on Sea Island Spirits today to talk about Beaufort County folklore.
We're going to be talking about a variety of different topics related to the Beaufort, South Carolina area and folklore from that region.
Michael, you have a bit of a unique background when it comes to folklore, and I think you're uniquely qualified to talk about this. Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Sure. I grew up in Appalachia in western North Carolina in a family, two families of longtime storytellers with really strong storytelling traditions on both sides of my family. We grew up hearing all kinds of stories, and some of them were presented as true, and some of them were presented as fun fiction, and some of them were presented as it's fiction, except it's really true. And it gave me a really great love for stories and storytelling. I'm also a graduate of the Appalachian Studies program at Appalachian State University, and some of that was studying the folklore and beliefs and practices and unique cultures that are found in Appalachia.
And the show that we co-host, Arcane Carolinas, which is a podcast, actually won an award, the WRAL Viewers' Choice Award for Best Podcast this past year.
And in that, we focus on the myths, legends, lore, and hidden history of the Carolinas.
So my background in folklore is that I just really like weird, spooky stories. That's really how it started. And it's sort of grown over the years. I think it started, in childhood, like you, hearing strange stories. But then I got a little adventurous as a teenager and started running out in the woods trying to find the sources of some of these things, right? So you go out and you explore, and you sort of grow out of that phase and sneaking into places you're not necessarily supposed to be and looking for trouble. And that's when I really started getting into research and attempting to determine through land use records, birth death records, special library archives, where do these stories come from? What part of it is the true part? What part of it is the fable, right? Or that lesson that you're supposed to learn from the story? And which ones are just for fun?
Yeah, and it's really important to us to talk about the distinctions between history and folklore and to find that middle gray area where they actually meet.
My family is Old Beaufort, so there's a lot of tales that I've grown up with. My father grew up at the end of Federal Street and the Thomas More House. My Aunt Helen and Aunt Winnie were in the big house known as the White Pringle House now, back behind the Performing Arts Center, which used to be Beaufort Elementary. Because of that, I've always been tied into a lot of family history, although my sister, Ann Politzer, is definitely the family historian. But many things that I have grown up with, I know my daughter is going to talk about the castle and Grenache. My father lived a couple of houses down and would tell me the stories of going into the castle and Grenache chastising them for sneaking in there. So I've always had a tie-in to that. I've had a tie-in through being a local, as you would say. When I do the Kappa tours, I always ask my carriages how many are from Beaufort. And it's astounding to me how many think they're from Beaufort because they've been here for 3 years on Fripp. There's not that many people now. My kids take great pride in the fact that they are Beaufortonians. They have been involved in the tours, which goes through those areas where my family grew up, out in the Old Point. Well, I became involved in Kappa when my youngest child, who just turned 29 this week was 5. At that time, Kappa did 2 tours that raised money for their organization. Kappa itself is an organization that provides support for its Child Abuse Prevention Association. And they had the only safe house for children in 3 counties. Libby Holloway had said, you know, you would be hysterical on the hay rides that we do in Port Royal. And at that time, they did haunted hay rides for the younger children. And that's where my persona of Bloody Mary, the only female pirate of the Port Royal Sound, was born. And so we would do that. And all of my children at the time, my son was the brokenhearted planter on a porch. My oldest daughter was one of the dancing spirits in front of the church. And my youngest daughter, because so many of us had little kids, was one of the baby pirates out on the sands. And they would have somebody out there with them, and they'd roast hot dogs while we were all working. All of them moved up through into this. So you can either ride a carriage with me, my oldest daughter, who is right up there with me for craziness, and anybody that has a heart for children and those children that do not have stable, safe homes. That's where we get involved and how it's important to us and to have fun with Beaufort. There's people out there telling stories. There's people out there, you don't know whether they're really there or not. Sometimes I've had that happen. I'd be going along and I hear somebody say, did you see that? And I think, we don't have anybody over there in a costume. Southern Rose himself, Rose that owns it, was my driver one night, and she was telling me about on the green, people kept coming back and saying, that is so interesting, the way you've got those guys out there with those pistols having a duel. And we did not, I swear to you, have anybody out there doing a duel on the green. But we had 3 carriages see it. And they thought we were pulling their leg about it. So you never know. You never know what might happen. It's important, it's valuable, and it's a load of fun. I taught at St. Helena for 20 years, 10 years at Broad River, and then 5 years back at St. Helena, which is right off where Land's End is. And that Story of the Light I have heard and have participated in. As an educator, I guess you would say, is I'm also a trainer for Kappa Tours. And there's actually a script that's about this thick that lists all the different things, which you could never ever say them all in a time frame. But each person takes those that speak to them. And Lands and Light has always spoken to me because as a teenager, I was one of those fools out there in a 68 Mustang.
Michael, are you familiar with, in Beaufort County, St. Helena Island?
No.
Okay, so it is a very large sea island. It's about 64 square miles.
Oh, that is large.
And it is home to what a lot of accounts will call one of the biggest. We talked about the most dreadful creature, one of the biggest legends in the area.
Oh, all right.
Which is the Land's End Light.
Oh.
And there is so much history and science behind what this might be.
Oh, okay. We've talked about lights.
I had to bring notes.
Oh, all right. We've talked about lights in other places, and I am fascinated. This is one of my favorite kinds of topics.
So there is it's Land's End Road.
Okay.
So, Land's End Light, Land's End Road. Not like the clothing company. It's just a road. So Land's End Road, it's like there's a stretch of it. It's like long, wooded Spanish moss hanging down off the trees, like cracked asphalt, old 2-lane road.
Yeah.
And it runs all the way down to a fort at the end of the island. It's said, for generations have reported this, that if you park at a certain spot along this road, you can see a big orb of light, like a not insignificant singular orb of light will start in the distance and come towards you.
Go ahead.
So when you're first seeing it, you might think it's a headlight,
Oh,
right? And you're like,
like
oh,
that bright.
yeah, you're like, oh, a car has a headlight out. But as it gets closer, you realize it's not quite that bright, and it's much larger than you thought.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so it's been, some people have posted photographs on the
Okay.
internet. There's a lot of different accounts. Again, this has been reported for generations. And it's said that if you get close to it, it has an effect that will make the hair on your arm stand up.
Okay, I like this.
If you're in a car, it'll interfere with the electronics in your car as it passes through.
All right.
Because it passes through, it's not a thing that just disappears.
So it's not like many of the lights in other places where as soon as you get too close, it vanishes or goes further
No, there are
away.
accounts of it like actively coming into contact with people and passing through them.
I love this.
Yeah, and it has like physical effects.
I love it.
Right, so what it is in the legend varies from person to person.
The Lands End light, or the light it lands in, it's known by both, is very unusual to me because most folklore stories of its nature, I mean, almost every old town has got a light somewhere. And it's somebody's head got chopped off, or it's somebody got hit by a train. Or the thing that's interesting to me about Lands End Light is there is no one story. There never has been. There are stories that go all the way back to the Civil War that talks about a Private Quigley who was ambushed by a Yankee soldier and had his head cut off. And he's looking with his iron lantern to try to find his head. That to me makes the least sense, even though, yes, they all around Beaufort and the waterways between here and Port Royal, there was always a lot of military presence during any wartime. In fact, Fort Frederick, that's right there off of that, was built and never used because the war ended before it was finished. But that one doesn't speak to me. Then there's the one that says that there was a bus driver driving children home, had a wreck, several children were killed. And that's somebody out there, he's out there looking for the kids. The tale goes back way before there would have been somebody with a bus with kids in it. So that doesn't speak to me.
Some people will say that along the stretch of road, enslaved people had been hung. And then it's the ghost of former enslaved people that can't find rest. Some people will say it's the ghost of a Confederate soldier because there was a conflict on the island. The Union took it from the Confederacy very early in the war. There are some that say that it's some guy named Quigley,
Okay.
which I like.
Yeah.
So,
I
and
like
then
that there's a very specific name attached to it.
right, and then you get into the whole like, oh, it's swamp gas. There's people that are like, it's swamp gas. And you get people that say that it's like headlights from around the bend, that sort of thing.
The one to me that makes the greatest sense is the fact that to see the light, you park under the hanging tree. There are a great many huge old oaks and water oaks along that road, which you have to understand that from in the 60s, there was no Martin Luther King Drive. There was no light right there. It was just a stop sign. And when you turned, it was Lands End Road all the way back until you hit the water. And the 60s and the early 70s, they renamed the portion in front of Penn Center because they knew that Martin Luther King Jr. had come to Penn Center. And so as an honorary, they named that portion. But once you get past Club Bridge Road and back in there where Ephraim and the little side roads are, that becomes Lands End Road till you get back there. So when you're going back there, you'll see lots of trees. And of course now, there's lots of of houses, and there's tomato farms and watermelons and all that back there. But there's a singular tree that's very large that sat farther back when I was a teenager because they widened the road. And it was always called the hanging tree. What we always were told was captured slaves who tried to escape were hung from that tree. Slaves who were looking for family members that had been sold out of the family, looking for them, had been caught and hung, were hung from that tree. That to me makes the greater sense to the legend and the time frame where it's supposedly created. I double checked and looked it up. There's no actual year. It's like middle 1800s to the end is where you start hearing about the legend.
But what is agreed upon is that it happens and that you can see it.
Okay, so there's no debate about this.
Yeah. People say that, tons of people say they've seen it.
I know where I want to go.
Now, there is one particular account that I get a kick out of that says, oh, it comes every night. You just got to wait long enough, which very much feels like a snipe hunt to me.
Yes, that feels like something you tell somebody because you want to make them stay out there all night.
Right.
That's funny. I like that a lot.
So I don't know about that part of it. But what is known is that it does happen. So the Land's End Light is what we're going to be talking about.
Great.
I think it's important to note before we go on, this is where I really need my notes because there is a list that I need to run through.
Okay.
The similarity to other lights phenomena.
Okay, yeah.
Where, you know, lights will appear in a field or in the forest to people. And this isn't just like a local phenomena where like South Carolina has several lights. This is global. There are cultures all around the world that have these. And a lot of times there's a malevolent aspect to these lights.
Yes.
Where the lights will be leading someone off to their doom or to some unfortunate location where bad things will befall them. Maybe not necessarily doom, but nothing good.
But yeah, unpleasantness.
Unpleasantness. These are sometimes referred to as, and this is why I need my list, ghost lights, corpse candles, will-o'-the-wisps, fairy lights, spook lights, ghost orbs, pucks, or hinky punk.
Or what?
Hinky punk.
Hinky bunk.
Punk.
Hinky punk.
Hinky punk.
Okay.
It's some like, it's like a rural English thing.
Okay, I'm just going to take that as read.
I really
I'm not gonna...
I really had to go into, I was like, where did this come from?
I want to know the etymology of that.
Yeah, so generally speaking, these lights, these orbs aren't necessarily a positive thing.
Yeah.
But to really get into where this legend comes from, specifically, you know, how did it get to be the big one in Beaufort County, right? I think it's important to look at the history of the island itself. It was inhabited by a wide variety of indigenous tribes to varying degrees. So it wasn't like one people's island. And European settlers had a real sort of rough and tumble relationship with each other as they tried to colonize it. So there are records from the French, the Spanish, and English settlers between 1562 and 1751 because it kept changing hands between European settlers, or rather their armies, navies, whatever, invading forces, that they attributed over 24 tribes of indigenous people to this 164 square mile island.
Wow, that's a lot of people and a lot of distinct peoples.
Yes. And the dispersed nature of this led to a lot of exploitation. 1521 is when Spanish settlers first showed up, and they immediately enslaved the local population of Native Americans. In 1576, there was a coordinated conflict between and I do need to read this because I want to make sure I pronounce it as closely as I can, the Escamacu tribe. And this was such a big conflict with the Spanish that it was sometimes referred to as the Escamacu War.
Okay.
And eventually, Spanish in control in the region waned.
Yeah.
And the French came in and took advantage of that. And then the French said, no, we're good. because the English showed up and kicked them out. So you've already got this like tumultuous history on the island, and we are still in the 1500s.
There's in multiple topics that we've talked about in the Carolinas, and specifically on the coast of South Carolina in this region. This is really where the colonial powers met in North America.
And they were just duking it out, for
Yes.
lack of a better term, constantly.
And all the native peoples suffered as a result of it.
Right. All the colonial conflict eroded the indigenous population. People either left or got mixed up in the conflict or were, enslaved like by the Spanish and eventually perished that way. But things eventually settled down as an English-controlled area. And this is something that we've talked about in other episodes and other stories. They noticed that, like, hey, you can grow rice here. So they began bringing enslaved people from West Africa and packing the island that way to grow rice. They also grew indigo, cotton, and spices.
Yeah.
Yeah. But here's the thing. It was a mix of enslaved Native Americans, West Africans, indentured servants brought over from Europe, and that is part of what we've talked about in other episodes, contributed to the Gullah, was it was this melting pot of different cultures where they were able to persist their own cultures.
Yeah.
You put this much more eloquently in another episode.
Well, they just had that benefit of, because of the specific circumstances of this region, they were not forcibly, they did not have their cultures forcibly erased by the people who had enslaved them.
Right. So, fast forward to the Civil War. The North shows up in a big way in 1861.
In part as a result of Robert Smalls,
Yes.
who's a fascinating topic of his own.
They show up and say, this is ours, right off the bat. 1861, all the slaves working on local plantations are immediately freed. And in 1862, the island featured the first ever school for freed slaves in America called the Penn School.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this?
Yes, I won't try to distract you from your topic, but yes, it's fascinating.
Yeah, so like a century later, St. Helena Island became a haven for the civil rights movement in the region, largely thanks to having had the Penn School established so long before.
Right.
Dr. Martin Luther King actually stayed in a home there for a time.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And today the Penn Center is on the campus of where the school was, and it preserves and protects the island's history. It's like a historical site.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So the island itself is renowned for low country character and preservation of Gullah culture and language. So that's the history of the location.
Yes.
Right? We want to get an understanding of like, where are we talking about? So what about the history of that location can we apply to the possible theories of the legend?
I'm ready for this.
Ghosts.
That's like an obvious answer, but it's also a great answer.
Right, ghosts feel like the obvious answer for like, if you attribute to ghosts that they are someone's unresting soul,
Sure.
right? Like, let's say that it's actually that person's spirit wandering the earth due to some trauma or inability to move on to the other side. So much in that history could explain that. If you think that ghosts are sort of like a photograph of a traumatic time and it's a psychic imprint on a physical location, you could apply the same logic there. Like, a lot of people died on this island under not great circumstances, right?
Yes.
A lot of psychic trauma. The amount of colonial conflict, enslavement of residents, Civil War conflict, like it was a hotbed of conflict. But also in 1893, the Sea Islands hurricane came through, and rivals, if you look at the way the National Weather Service tracks hurricanes, it ranks as the 7th most destructive hurricane in the United States, like ever.
It's going to come up in another story we talk about.
Okay. So that would certainly cause a lot of lost souls.
Oh, yeah. Many, many, many people died in that hurricane.
As a teenager in Beaufort, going to see the light was kind of a excuse to take a six-pack and go parking. That's where everybody went out there. So we're just going to go see the light. So there'd be a lot of couples out there not necessarily looking for. I actually preferred Pigeon Point Landing, a little safer. But you'd go out there and there'd be 20, 30 cars. You have to go out the road, but then you have to, when you get to the hanging tree, you turn and park facing the direction you came. At that time, my time, 68, 69, there was not a lot of side streets. There were some dirt roads off and all, but there wouldn't be any side streets. And there are, as I've talked to different people who swear to me they've seen the light, there are some different versions of what they've seen. The night that I saw it, we're talking mid-July, 68. Brand new friend with a Mustang, my older brother Cannon, and the two McGowan cousins, Angie and Marty. We were all crammed into this and doing what most people do on a Friday night. Back then, you just drove around. Or you went to Piggy Park, which is now Yummy, was Piggy Park, which is why, by the way, the parking lot is kind of oddly laid out. It used to be a drive-in. So we drive around, and somebody suggested, we'll go out and see the light. So we went out there. We did our little parking, and we're sitting there just talking, and we did not have beer with us that night. And so we sat there, and we waited, and we waited, and we were about to leave because we thought this is kind of silly, and it's hot out here, and you know. And then down from the very, very end, looking very tiny, was two little blue lights. Very tiny little blue lights. And we thought, well, can't be tail lights. They're not blue. That's kind of weird. And they appeared to be moving extremely slowly toward us. Just enough to make you think, am I really seeing this? What is this? It didn't turn. We didn't watch it come from any particular direction. It was just suddenly there and moving incredibly slowly and getting a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter as it came on. At about the time we were about to wet ourselves, it suddenly converged into a single light, turned bright white, and went right over the top of the car. I have had several people tell me about how it went through their car. This time it did. It went over the car and disappeared. We have no explanation for that. Of course, scientists say it's marsh light. There is no marsh around there. It's all farming. That's not what's there. So you can't say it's marsh gas or anything. It was a very popular place to go out and look into the 70s. And then it got to be very popular with local Marines that would go out there and try to chase it. There were several extremely bad wrecks out there. Two that I know of that had deaths involved with them, where they would just try to chase it and that section is straight, coming right up. There's no turn. It's not like something's going to suddenly come up on you. But if you're going fast enough, when it does start to make the turn, you're going to go right out off the road. And that's what happened in two different instances. And so after that, the local police decided that it would be very important to make it expensive to park out there. That's the only way they figured they'd get the kids out. So it became a $250 fine to be caught parking at that tree. And of course, we didn't have that. So that was pretty much the end of that. From what I've heard, I always try to ask people when I'm on tour with Kappa, whether or not they've seen it and what they see. Some people say the light that they see is like an orangish light or yellowish light. Some do say it's blue like I've seen. Almost all of them say it starts the same way, it speeds up, it goes through their car or over their car. Very few people go out there anymore to look at it. It's grown up so much out there, and of course, because there's now a light, at the crossroads there, and have been some very unfortunate shootings, well, all over Beaufort. It's just not a safe thing to go and just park yourself anywhere to look for a legend. But the legend still exists, and we still have people that have gone out there to look for it, and they do see it. Some don't. But I did see it, and so I can vouch for the fact that a Beaufortonian did see it in 1968.
What about Quigley?
What about Quigley?
My man, Quigley. As it turns out, reported June 16th, 1910, in the Beaufort newspaper, an Army soldier stationed at Fort Fremont on the island named Frank J. Quigley was shot and killed by a local man.
Ooh.
Yep. There are conflicting newspaper reports as
That's something we run into sometimes.
Yeah, as to some of the finer points of what exactly happened. But they agree that there was an argument. There was people don't just get shot. No, there was a dispute. Some say it was over what we'll call beverage sales.
Okay.
Some say it was the result of a pickpocketing gone wrong.
Oh.
Where an individual had gotten in good with some of the soldiers and then tried to rob them. And it went sideways and somebody got stabbed. And then the shooting was a result of the conflict after the stabbing.
Right.
Then there's an account that it was the result of relations between someone from the base and someone else's wife on the island. But here's the thing that's important to note. So there's all these different things that might have caused Frank J. Quigley to get shot. Frank J. Quigley was not the guilty party in any of this.
Oh. So he's an innocent bystander.
Kinda. Did you ever get told not to go along with kids when they're doing something bad?
Yes.
Yeah. So Frank and his co-workers, we'll say, so some other soldiers, went to this home where a confrontation broke out between the residents of the home and the soldiers. And some say that it was an ambush and that Frank was shot from the bushes.
Okay.
Others say that it was from the porch of the home. Doesn't matter. Frank got shot. Some soldiers go to a house. They're mad about something. The people in the house aren't having it. They shoot at him.
Right.
Frank catches one. Frank dies.
Wow. Poor Frank.
All the accounts say that locals and everybody liked Frank. He was a decent person and was mourned by the community and the people living on the fort.
Okay.
Which is interesting to me.
Yeah.
Maybe if you see people going along to get into some trouble, maybe you don't go with them. And we can't read into what his motivations might have been, but
it's interesting that if one of the potential explanations is a conflict between people from a local military base and the community around it being in conflict with one another, that both of those parties also spoke highly of him after his death.
right,
It tells you that he was probably not the instigator.
right. Yeah, nobody said that he was the instigator in any of these accounts. But anyway, so Frank Quigley was real. He did exist. He died on the island.
Wow, okay.
He was very young, early 20s.
So one of the explanations has a name and a time, and it's legit.
Yep.
That is a miracle in this realm.
Okay, y'all, we are heading out here to the Land's End Road where the legend, the Land's End light is. Now, many Beaufortonians, as they call themselves, have seen this light, so we're going to go out there tonight and we're going to try to find it. It's almost sunset right now, so we're going to get out there early, get a couple of really nice videos, and we will keep y'all updated. Okay, so you start from the main road in St. Helena Island, and there's going to be a sign here at this red light that says Land's End Road, and it's right next to a Gullah Geechee visitor center. And you're just going to turn down this road, and it's pretty much just a long and straight stretch. And as you go this way, from looking it up online, It's described as being a little bit past the Chapel of Ease, and then there's this intersection from this road onto Old Bluff Road, and there's going to be a big oak tree that you need to find and park and look at. So we will show you when we get a little bit closer. So there is one source online that described this road as one of the most haunted roads in South Carolina. And I had to come out here in the daytime to find the tree because I didn't know if I would be able to find it at night. But as you can see, there is just this like Spanish moss hanging over this road. There's an abandoned building. It just kind of, you know, gives off those creepy vibes. So I think that could definitely be a true statement. And as you get further down here, there's like big farmland on both sides, and it can just creep somebody out before they even really get out there. Right there's the Chapel of Ease that they say is near the light. Okay, so we are out here. It is this big oak tree right here known as the hanging tree. I'm gonna try to get some better shots. It's a little dark right now, but yeah, they say you have to pull off of the road and point your car at it. And when it gets dark, I guess we'll see what happens. As you can see, we've got our car pulled off right here. So they say you have to turn it off completely. So whenever I'm done getting some video, we're gonna turn it off, we're gonna sit in there and we're gonna see what happens. Here is a better shot of the tree. I can already see a light, but I'm gonna assume that that's headlights. But yes, this is the tree. Obviously, you can see it's very large and it hangs over the road.
Yes. Headlights.
We were testing to see if it was headlights because my mom was scared. I think that happens often. Here's an even further away view. So you can see there's something down there. I'm gonna just assume that is a car. Yeah, it looks like two lights coming my way. But yes, here is the tree.
After, like, how many lights do you look at before you start seeing lights? You know what I mean? I feel like that's what happens. Like, I feel like if you look like straight into somebody's headlights so many times, you're going to start seeing spots.
Yeah, maybe.
What's weird is, what is this smoky? Like, put your hand in front of the light.
Like,
This stuff, the smoke looking stuff. Do you see what I'm seeing?
yeah.
What is that?
There's definitely a light. What is it is the question. You think that's a car?
Yeah, it's probably a car. It's on the road, isn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a car coming.
Well, I'm gonna video every light I see. I don't know. It has that yellowish tint. Are you sure that's a car? I only see one light.
Jesus, I don't know what that is. That's weird looking. It's...
I only see one light though. What the heck?
Should I start the car? See if it goes away?
I don't. We are here on a mission. What is going on? Maybe it's. Maybe it's multiple cars?
I don't know, but
Like, I feel like it's not getting any closer.
is it supposed to be getting closer?
I don't know.
Let's talk about other possibilities for the light, though, because remember, there's lots of different potential explanations.
Yes.
Ball lightning or globe lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Some folks immediately jump to ball lightning every time one of these light stories come up. It is exceptionally rare.
Yeah.
It's real. Instances of ball lightning, electric orbs moving through the sky, have been recorded for centuries. It's a really weird phenomena, but it is legitimate. National Geographic pins down the first recorded sighting of ball lightning in 1638, when a, quote, great ball of fire came through the window of a church.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
in England.
All right.
Other early accounts suggest that ball lightning can be deadly if it touches you.
I would imagine that is quite possible.
Yeah, so people think it's ball lightning. Scientific American reports that 5% of people on the planet will ever see ball lightning.
Okay.
It's that rare.
Right. And in every story like this, whether it's the Mako light, the Bingham light, the Land's End light, all these, the Brown Mountain lights, they're sufficiently reliable that it feels to me like it would defy that sort of explanation of
Yes.
being a rare phenomenon.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm ruling out ball lightning.
Thank you. I was hoping that you, being somebody with an actual science background, would be like, it's not that.
It's not ball lightning.
Okay.
Swamp gas.
It's not swamp gas.
I love UFOs. You know I love
Yes.
UFOs. And swamp gas bore the brunt of so many UFO stories that I will admit my prejudice against swamp gas.
I just figure swamp gas is pretty tired by now after all that stuff it's been carrying around for decades.
But swamp gas illuminating is real.
Yes, it is real.
Decaying organic matter like rotting vegetables and carcasses, the types of things that you would find in a swamp, can put off gas like phosphine and methane that have been proven to be capable of spontaneously combusting when coming into contact with oxygen, causing brief low temperature flares.
Yeah. Foxfire.
Yeah, exactly. It's not physically damaging to things. It's not powerful enough. It's even been replicated in laboratories. Like it's been proven to be a thing. There's no way this is that.
Yeah, does it, wander up and down the road and mess with people's cars? I'm betting not.
But do you know what would cause that?
What would cause that?
Electric rocks.
Electric rocks.
Yes. So
tell.
are you familiar with the term? I've heard this pronounced many different ways, either piezoelectric or piezoelectric.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know exactly what it means, but I'm familiar with the term.
So it is when an object is capable of generating electricity due to pressure or outside force upon it.
Oh, okay.
So your lighter for your grill,
Yeah.
like they sell at the grocery store, yay long, you pull the trigger, whatever. The way that generates the spark to light the gas is you're pushing down on a spring. That spring is connected to a metal hammer. So once the spring is loaded and the mechanism trips the hammer, that hammer smacks a crystal.
Really?
Yeah. And that generates enough electric charge to create a spark.
That's fascinating. I had no idea.
So that's a practical example of how it works.
Okay.
There's a lot more examples I could use, but that's something that I think would be somewhat universal.
Everybody knows that one.
Right. I was actually able to nail down potential geological explanations. Dr. John Durr of the U.S. Geological Survey has published several papers theorizing on correlations between seismic activity and atmospheric anomalies.
Really?
Yep. And he's got a peer, Dr. Michael Persinger, who proposed that ignis fatuus may be geological in origin.
Interesting.
From tectonic strain.
The U.S. Geological Survey does a lot of really fascinating work. They're one of the earliest expert opinions on the Brown Mountain Light.
And guess what is up with South Carolina?
What is up with South Carolina?
It is, let me get my stats because I don't want to mess this up. Out of all 50 states, it is the 16th highest in seismic activity.
Really?
Yeah, they have earthquakes.
Okay. I've experienced a very small earthquake growing up in the mountains of western North Carolina, so I believe that.
They also have, because it's a sea island, there's phenomena where like saturated soil and sands cause shifts.
Yeah.
Right? So if you've got like quartz or silicone or even arsenic in the soil, those are all minerals that can trigger electric responses.
Wow.
Do you know how this manifests in the atmosphere according to these professors?
No. The ghosts of men named Quigley.
No. The vaporized water that happens when plates are rubbing together, seismic activity can carry the charge as it moves upwards through the soil. So the minerals are rubbing together, there's pressure, they're generating electricity. While that's happening, there is heat generated, which vaporizes moisture in the soil, which pushes its way up to the surface, at which point it enters the atmosphere and manifests as electricity in the atmosphere.
So basically the steam becomes the wire for
Yes.
the electricity.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. I love it.
It would explain why the light causes electrical effects.
Yeah.
It would explain the erratic movement, like as it zooms through.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Wow.
Or, and this is my last one, so we're moving on from electric rocks.
Okay, well, hopefully it's spooky, because I always prefer the spooky.
I know you do. What if it is the physical manifestation of collective consciousness believing that they should see a spirit light?
Oh, okay, I love this now.
That's my theory. I made that up.
Oh, okay. You made that up knowing I would fall for it.
I did.
Yes.
But it's a legitimate thing.
It is.
Theory. It's
It does like raise the possibility of like, what if people hear a story about a light so many times that they do start seeing it?
Yeah.
That they make it real.
Right. If enough people hear it enough times.
Yeah. My take personally is I like the ghost idea, whether it's Quigley or not.
Sure.
I like that just
There's a
because
lot there for that. There's a lot there for that.
a lot of potential explanations where that ghost would come from. And you know me, I always want the supernatural explanation.
I know you do. I like the rocks.
I like the rocks also. That's fascinating.
Let's go smack some rocks with hammers and see if we can make some sparks.
How much electricity, you might not have the answer to this. How
I
much
probably don't.
Okay. How much electricity, like, I don't know even how we would measure it or express it, like watts, voltage, I don't know. But how much could get released by something like that?
With a big enough rock and a big enough lighter?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
But that electrical phenomena, that static phenomenon, that aspect to it, I immediately thought UFOs. But obviously,
I always wanted to be UFOs. You always wanted to be ghosts.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be aliens.
those are the sides of the coin for us.
Right.
But I just found it fascinating that it corresponds so directly. It overlaps so much with that experience.
Well, thank you for listening to me talk about electric rocks and the Land's End Light.
Well, thanks for telling us about the Land's End Light.